The last thing I saw was the jagged edge of the limestone cliff, and my brother's hand pulling back as I slipped into the gray mist of the canyon. My name is Paige Whitaker. I am 28 years old, and I never believed my own brother, Tyler, would try to kill me for the dirt we stood on. That morning on Cedar Ridge Trail started with a cold wind and a heavy silence between us. We were there to discuss the land trust our parents left behind, a vast stretch of forest and mineral-rich hills that we co-owned. I remember the sound of my boots skidding on loose gravel and the look of pure, icy calculation in Tyler's eyes. He didn't reach for me, he watched me fall. The world turned upside down as I tumbled down the steep, rocky slope. Branches tore at my jacket, and stones bruised my skin, until a final, crushing impact against a narrow ledge knocked the breath from my lungs. Everything went black as the smell of damp pine needles filled my senses. I didn't die on Cedar Ridge Trail, even though the county records now say I did. The fall broke 2 of my ribs, my left wrist, and the elaborate story my brother planned to sell to the world. I woke up in a small, quiet clinic in a rural town miles away from the main trailhead. The light coming through the window was soft, but my head throbbed with a rhythmic pain that made it hard to focus. When I finally found my voice, I asked the nurse to call my family, but she looked at me with a strange, pitying expression. No one had come for me. I realized then that my phone and my ID were missing, likely taken from the ledge or lost in the brush during the tumble. The nurse told me that search teams had already been dispatched to the ridge and had recovered what they could. That specific wording sat wrong in my bones, like a cold draft in a closed room. It sounded final, as if they were talking about items rather than a person. I tried to sit up, but the pain in my ribs forced me back down. I was a ghost in a hospital bed, alive, but officially lost to the world. I waited for Tyler to burst through the door with tears of relief, but the hallway remained empty. The silence in that clinic was the first real clue that my life was being erased by the person I trusted most. The next morning, the nurse left a small radio playing on the bedside table to keep me company. I was drifting in and out of sleep when a local radio bulletin caught my ear. The announcer's voice was steady as he listed me among the week's fatalities in the county. He said my name, Paige Whitaker, and stated that my brother had officially signed the death report. The cause was listed as a fatal fall, and the report claimed my body was unrecoverable due to the treacherous terrain and river at the base of the ridge. I sat there, clutching the thin hospital blanket, and listened to the news of my own death between the local weather report and the morning farm prices. It was a surreal, sickening feeling to hear your life reduced to a 30-second clip for commuters. Tyler hadn't just left me to die. He had actively gone to the authorities to ensure I stayed dead on paper. He had closed the book on my existence before I even had the chance to open my eyes. The betrayal was a physical weight, heavier than the cast on my arm. I knew then that returning home wouldn't be as simple as catching a ride. I had to find out why he was in such a hurry to bury me. 2 days later, I managed to discharge myself against medical advice. I took a slow, painful bus ride to the county clerk's office, keeping my face hidden behind a borrowed scarf. When I finally stood at the counter and gave my name to the clerk, she turned as white as a sheet and nearly fainted. She fumbled with her files, her hands shaking as she looked at me. She told me that my death certificate had been expedited and filed within just a few hours of the accident. It had been signed with an unusual sense of urgency that even the office staff had found strange. Usually, when a body isn't found, there is a waiting period, a lingering hope, but Tyler had bypassed every safety net. He had used his influence and the unrecoverable status to push the paperwork through the system like he was filing a routine tax return. Seeing the official seal on that document made my heart race. It wasn't just a mistake or a grieving brother's rush, it was a legal execution of my rights. I left the office before she could call anyone, realizing that on paper, I no longer had a right to my own name or my own life. I took a taxi to the edge of our family estate, hiding in the tree line to observe what was happening. Our parents' land trust was structured so that the property transferred automatically to the surviving heir if one died. As a co-owner, I had always felt secure, But now I saw the true motive behind the accident. I checked the public land records on a library computer later that hour and saw the update. The title was now listed with a sole owner. My brother, Tyler Whitaker. He hadn't waited for a funeral or a memorial. He had claimed the land the moment the ink dried on the death certificate. This land had been in our family for 3 generations, and I had fought Tyler for years about preserving it. He saw it as a bank account. I saw it as a legacy. By declaring me dead, he had removed the only obstacle to his plans. I looked at the digital record, seeing my name struck through with a red line. It was a cold, calculated theft of everything our parents had worked for. Tyler wasn't just grieving a sister, he was celebrating a promotion. The realization that my brother valued dirt and timber over my life made the broken ribs feel like a minor injury. The next morning, I crept closer to the property entrance, staying behind a thicket of oaks. My heart sank when I saw a survey company truck already parked near the main gate. Men in orange vests were walking the perimeter with GPS equipment and marking stakes. This wasn't just a general plan, this was an active project. I recognized the logo on the truck as a firm that specialized in heavy industrial development. It became clear that someone expected drilling permits or construction to begin very soon. Tyler had clearly been in talks with developers long before our hike on Cedar Ridge. He couldn't sell the land or sign the permits as long as I held half the voting rights in the trust. The speed at which these contractors appeared proved that the deal was already on the table, waiting for my signature or my disappearance. I watched them drive stakes into the meadow where I used to play as a child, feeling a deep sense of violation. My death was the key that unlocked the gates for the bulldozers. I realized that if I didn't act quickly, the land would be scarred beyond repair, and the evidence of his greed would be buried under layers of gravel and concrete. I knew I couldn't handle this alone, so I went to the one person Tyler couldn't manipulate, our longtime family attorney, Mr. Keating. When I walked into his office, he looked like he had seen a ghost. He didn't scream, but he locked his office door immediately and drew the blinds. He told me that Tyler had pushed aggressively for the early certification of my death, citing financial stability for the estate as the reason. Keating admitted that it felt wrong at the time, too aggressive for a brother who was supposed to be in the depths of grief. He told me that Tyler had called him 6 times in 48 hours, demanding to know when the land transfer would be finalized. Keating had tried to slow him down, but with the signed county documents, there was little he could do legally. He wasn't acting like a man who lost his sister, Keating whispered, his voice full of regret. He was acting like a man who had just won the lottery. Seeing the look of validation in Keating's eyes gave me a spark of hope. I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't alone. We sat in the dim light of his office and began to piece together the paper trail that Tyler thought he had hidden. Keating helped me access the official coroner's intake file through his legal portal. We looked at the high-resolution photos of the items Tyler had submitted as proof of my death. The bag contained burned scraps of my favorite hiking jacket, my retainer case, and my engraved silver compass, a gift from our father. Tyler told the authorities these items were found near the edge of the drop, implying I had been shredded by the rocks. However, when I zoomed in on the photo of the compass, my breath hitched. The silver casing was shiny and pristine, with no impact damage at all. If I had fallen 500 feet onto the rocks, that compass should have been bent, shattered, or at least heavily scratched. Instead, it looked like it had been gently placed on a table. It was a plant, a piece of staged evidence meant to provide a sense of closure without a body. Tyler had been so focused on providing proof that he forgot the basic laws of physics. This small silver circle was the first crack in his perfect story. It was a physical lie that he had handed directly to the police, thinking no one would ever look closely at a dead girl's belongings. We needed more than just a suspicious compass, so Keating contacted a connection at the Park Service. A veteran trail ranger who had been part of the initial search remembered Tyler vividly, but not for his tears. The ranger told us that Tyler had spent most of the search time on his phone, looking at his watch. Most suspiciously, Tyler had asked the ranger how long death declarations usually take when no body is found. He hadn't asked about survival rates or the probability of me being stuck on a ledge. He was asking about the legal timeline for a death certificate. What made the ranger's skin crawl was the fact that Tyler asked this question before the search teams had even finished their first sweep of the ridge. He was already planning the paperwork while I was still lying unconscious in the brush. The ranger had noted it in his personal log because it felt so cold-blooded. This testimony was crucial. It showed premeditation. Tyler wasn't reacting to a tragedy. He was following a schedule. He had a deadline, and I was just a line item that needed to be cleared. We thanked the ranger, knowing we were building a mountain of truth to bury Tyler's lies. As we dug deeper into the official search logs, we found an even more damning detail regarding the timeline of the accident. The logs showed that Tyler didn't report my fall until almost 3 hours after it happened. He claimed he had to hike back to his truck to get a signal, but Keating and I knew that ridge well. There is full cell coverage across the entire Cedar Ridge Trail. Our father used to take business calls from the very spot where I fell. There was no reason for a 3-hour delay unless Tyler was waiting to make sure I didn't climb back up. He had spent those 3 hours pacing the cliffside, perhaps even watching for any sign of movement below, making sure the accident was final before he called for help. That gap in time was a void filled with his intent to let me die. Every minute he waited was a deliberate choice to withhold help. To the police, he played the part of the exhausted, panicked brother, but the timestamps on the logs told a different story. He had given me 3 hours to bleed out in the cold before he bothered to dial 911. The realization made me sick to my stomach, but it fueled my resolve to see this through to the end. Keating's investigator found a retired couple who had been hiking on a lower trail that same afternoon. They hadn't seen the fall, but they remembered seeing 2 people matching our description arguing loudly near the overlook. They told the investigator that they heard a man's voice, Tyler's voice, telling a woman to stop blocking the sail. They described the tone as harsh and predatory. There was no mention of safety or the dangerous height. It was entirely about the land. It sounded like a business meeting gone wrong, not a family hike, the woman had noted. This witness account blew a hole in Tyler's tragic accident narrative. It established a clear motive. The land sale. He wasn't a grieving brother. He was a frustrated businessman. I remembered that argument now. The way his face contorted when I told him I would never sign the development papers. He had lured me to that ridge under the guise of a reconciliation hike. But he had brought his greed with him. These hikers didn't know me, but their memory of that afternoon was a lifeline. They had heard the truth before the lie was even born. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was one of cold-blooded betrayal. Mr. Keating advised me against making any direct contact with Tyler yet. He explained that we needed the element of surprise to ensure he didn't flee or destroy more evidence. Meanwhile, Tyler was busy pre-poisoning the community. We heard from neighbors that he was telling everyone I had been struggling with episodes of mental instability and identity issues lately. He was subtly suggesting that I might have jumped on purpose, or that I had been unwell for months. He was pre-building doubt in case I ever turned up, or perhaps just to explain away any oddities in his story. It was a brilliant, disgusting move. By making me out to be fragile, he made himself look like the long-suffering brother who was just trying to manage a difficult situation. He was painting a portrait of a woman who didn't exist, all to protect the man who had tried to kill her. Every time I heard a new rumor he had started, my blood boiled. He was stealing my reputation along with my life. But Keating just patted my hand and told me to stay patient. "Let him talk," he said. "The more he says now, the more he has to take back later." We hit another layer of the plot when a contact at a title company confirmed our suspicions. Tyler had started making preliminary inquiries about a total land transfer and title insurance 2 weeks before our hike. He had even asked about expedited probate in the event of a sudden death of a co-owner. He hadn't just reacted to my death. He had choreographed it. He had the buyer lined up, the insurance checked, and the legal questions answered before he even picked me up for that hike. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a corporate takeover with a body count. Seeing those dates on the inquiry forms made the room feel cold. He had sat across from at dinner, passing the salt and asking about my day while he was simultaneously checking the price of my life. He didn't see me as a sister. He saw me as a hurdle in a race toward a payout. The insurance layer was the smoking gun of his premeditation. He had prepared for my death with the same attention to detail he gave his investment portfolio. It was all about the deal, and I was the only thing standing in the way of a massive profit. Keating managed to get a private interview with the coroner's assistant who had handled the initial intake. She was a young woman who had felt uneasy about the way Tyler had behaved in the morgue office. She admitted that Tyler had been incredibly pushy, insisting on same-day processing of the death certificate. He had even mentioned a buyer deadline as a reason to skip certain verification steps. What Tyler didn't know was that the coroner's office recorded all intake conversations automatically for quality control and legal protection. The assistant told us that she had saved the recording of their interaction because his lack of emotion had disturbed her. He didn't ask where she was, or if there was any chance she was alive. She told Keating. He only asked when the paper would be ready. This was the gold mine we needed. A digital recording of Tyler's own voice, prioritizing a business deal over his sister's life, captured on the very day he claimed to be paralyzed by grief. We didn't have to guess his thoughts anymore. We had them on tape. The assistant's discomfort had provided us with the ultimate weapon against his facade. When Keating played the recording for me in his office, I had to grip the arms of my chair to keep from shaking. Tyler's voice came through the speakers, sounding as calm and detached as if he were reading a grocery list. "If this waits, the deal collapses," he said to the assistant. There was no tremor in his voice, no hint of a sob. He didn't refer to me as my sister, or mention the tragedy of the fall. He referred to the entire situation as this, a minor administrative delay. "I have investors waiting on the title," he continued on the tape. "We need to clear the name today." Hearing him speak about me like a piece of faulty equipment was a new kind of pain. It wasn't just that he tried to kill me. It was that he didn't even think my death was worth a moment of genuine silence. The deal was his heartbeat, his only priority. I realized then that Tyler had never really loved anyone. Not our parents, and certainly not me. He only loved the power that the land represented. That recording was the final piece of the puzzle. It was the mask-off moment we needed to destroy his public image and prove his criminal intent. The following Friday, I saw the notice in the church bulletin and the local paper. Tyler had organized a memorial service for Sunday afternoon. It was a closed casket ceremony, which was a grim joke considering the casket would be empty. The notice mentioned that the community was invited to mourn the tragic loss of Paige Whitaker, but it also listed several local land development partners as honored guests. My funeral had sponsors. He was using my memorial service as a networking event to finalize the sale of the land. He wanted to show the investors that the problem was officially buried and that the path to the mineral rights was clear. It was the ultimate insult, turning my death into a marketing opportunity. He was going to stand in front of our friends and neighbors, deliver a fake eulogy, and then shake hands on a multimillion-dollar deal over my empty grave. The coldness of it was almost impressive in its depravity. But as I read the notice, a different feeling took over. A calm, icy focus. If Tyler wanted a show, I was going to give him one he would never forget. The stage was set, and the guest of honor was planning an unannounced appearance. Keating and I spent the night before the funeral finalizing our strategy. He told me that the strongest move wasn't a press statement or a lawsuit filing that Tyler could tie up in court for years. The strongest move was simply my presence. "Walk in breathing," Keating said, his eyes sharp. "Truth wears shoes, Paige. Let them see the ribs you broke and the life you kept." We planned the timing, down to the minute. I wouldn't go to the police yet. I would let Tyler commit fully to his lie in front of the entire town. I wanted the witnesses. I wanted the developers to see that the man they were about to go into business with was a fraud and a potential murderer. We gathered the medical records, the coroner's recording, and the witness statements into a single, heavy folder. Keating would be there as my legal shield, but the impact would come from me. I was no longer the fragile sister Tyler had described. I was a survivor with a debt to collect. "Don't say a word until I give the signal," Keating warned. "Let the silence do the work." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace. The truth didn't need a script, it just needed to show up. On the morning of the funeral, Tyler tried one last desperate move to protect his flank. He filed an emergency motion in the local court, claiming that I had a long history of identity fraud attempts and mental instability. He was trying to pre-poison the legal system, so if I did reappear, he could claim I was an imposter or a delusional woman trying to steal his inheritance. He even managed to get a judge to schedule a review for later that week. It was a clever move. He was building a legal wall to keep me dead even if I walked into the room. He was trying to make the truth look like a symptom of a breakdown. Despite this new obstacle, the funeral proceeded as planned. Tyler was so confident in his web of lies that he thought he could handle any ghost that came back to haunt him. He didn't realize that a paper trail of fraud is much harder to maintain than a simple lie. We watched from a distance as the mourners began to arrive at the small-town church. Tyler was at the door, greeting people with a practiced look of somber dignity. He looked like the perfect grieving brother. It was time to break the act. As we approached the church, a staff member I've known since childhood whispered something to Keating. She told us that Tyler had ordered the casket to be sealed and restricted all access. He had even hired a private security guard to stand near it, claiming he wanted to protect his sister's dignity from onlookers. No viewing was allowed under any condition. Of course, the real reason was that the casket was empty, or perhaps filled with the same recovered items he had used to fool the coroner. He couldn't risk anyone catching a glimpse of the void inside. The sealed casket was the physical manifestation of his lie, a heavy, expensive box of nothing. It was his final attempt to control the narrative, to make the absence of my body feel like a respectful choice rather than a criminal necessity. I stood in the shadows of the vestibule, listening to the soft organ music drifting from the sanctuary. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He was asking the community to weep over an empty wooden box, while he planned to profit from the death of the person who should have been in it. Every step Tyler took was a deeper dive into his own grave. Just hours before the service began, a local banker who had worked with our parents for decades stepped forward. He contacted Keating in a panic. Apparently, Tyler had tried to borrow a massive sum of money against the land just yesterday, using the fresh death certificate as his primary collateral. He wasn't even waiting for the funeral to end before he started spending the money. Greed doesn't nap, the banker had noted, feeling sickened by Tyler's lack of decorum. This was the final proof of his immediate financial desperation. He needed the cash now, likely to pay off debts or to fund his part of the development deal. He was leveraged to the hilt, and my death was his only way out. This information gave us an even sharper edge. We knew exactly why he was there, moving so fast. He wasn't just greedy. He was cornered. The bank records would show that his grief was actually a frantic scramble for liquidity. As I prepared to enter the chapel, I felt a sense of justice rising. Tyler had built a house of cards on a foundation of my supposed remains, and the wind was about to pick up. I waited until the service reached its peak. Tyler stood at the pulpit, delivering a soft, practiced eulogy. He spoke about my fragile heart, and how I had struggled to find my way in the world. He was playing the role of the protective, heartbroken brother to perfection, and I could hear the muffled sobs of our neighbors in the pews. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Then, I gave Keating the nod. I pushed the heavy back doors of the chapel open. The hinges creaked, and a gust of cool afternoon air swept into the room. I walked in, my head held high, my arm in its cast visible for everyone to see. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The air in the church seemed to stop moving. The eulogy died in Tyler's throat. The mourners turned one by one, their faces shifting from confusion to absolute shock. I walked down the center aisle, my boots clicking on the wooden floor, heading straight for the man who had left me to die. The silence was louder than any scream. I saw the blood drain from Tyler's face until he was as pale as the sister he claimed to be burying. For a moment, Tyler just stared, his mouth hanging open. Then the panic set in, and he did exactly what Keating predicted. He doubled down on the lie. He pointed a shaking finger at me and shouted that I was an imposter. He told the crowd I was a trauma look-alike hired by his enemies or a part of a conspiracy to steal the estate. He claimed I was a victim of his sister's history of identity fraud. He talked too fast, his words tripping over each other as he tried to regain control of the room. But as he spoke, sweat began to pour down his face, writing the truth across his forehead for everyone to see. He looked unhinged, not grieving. Then, Keating stepped forward and signaled the church technician. Before Tyler could say another word, the coroner's audio recording began to play through the chapel speakers. Tyler's own voice, cold and calculating, filled the room. "If this waits, the deal collapses. We need to clear the name today." The contrast between the recording and his live performance was devastating. The room erupted in a low murmur of horror as the town realized they had been mourning for the wrong person. The memorial collapsed into chaos. 2 deputies who had been alerted by Keating and were waiting in the back walked down the aisle and escorted Tyler out mid-service. He was screaming about his rights and his deal. But no one was listening anymore. Then the final twist surfaced. A man in a sharp suit, the representative for the survey company, stood up from the front row. He looked disgusted. He testified right there in the church that Tyler had promised a guaranteed mineral rights transfer within 10 days, something that was only legally possible if I were dead. He admitted that Tyler had shown him the expedited paperwork as proof that the deal was ready to go. This was the final nail in the coffin. It proved premeditation beyond any doubt. Tyler hadn't just gotten lucky with a death certificate, he had marketed my death to the highest bidder before it even happened. The survey rep's testimony linked the greed directly to the accident on the ridge. The congregation watched in stunned silence as the truth was laid bare. My brother hadn't just tried to kill me, he had tried to sell the very ground I was supposed to be buried in. The legal fallout was swift and total. With the mountain of evidence Keating and I had gathered, the court ruling was a foregone conclusion. Tyler was charged with fraud, false reporting, attempted unlawful property seizure, and evidence tampering. The judge was particularly moved by the premeditation shown in the title company inquiries and the coroner's recording. Civil penalties stripped him of any remaining assets, and criminal charges ensured he would be behind bars for a long time. The land transfer was immediately voided, and my status as a living, breathing human being was legally restored. Tyler's development contracts dissolved as his partners scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. He lost the land, he lost his reputation, and he lost every partner who had once trusted his business sense. He was left with nothing but the consequences of his own choices. I watched from the gallery as he was led away in handcuffs, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. He had tried to erase me, to gain a fortune, but in the end, he only succeeded in erasing himself from the life we once shared. In the months that followed, I took the property and placed it into a permanent conservation easement. I used the remnants of the estate to open a public hiking preserve in our parents' names, ensuring that the land would never be drilled or paved. On the opening day, the trailhead drew more people than Tyler's fake funeral crowd ever had. Friends, neighbors, and strangers came to walk the paths I had fought to protect. Near the entrance, I placed a small bronze plaque that simply says, "Truth arrives on foot. Lies need paperwork." I spent the afternoon walking the trails, the sun filtering through the leaves of the trees I had saved. My ribs had healed, my wrist was strong again, and the weight of the betrayal had finally begun to lift. I looked out over the ridge, the same spot where I had nearly lost everything, and felt a deep sense of peace. I had lost a brother, but I had found my own strength and saved my family's legacy. The wind was warm, the trail was clear, and I'm still here. I'm still walking.